Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us today. And for those of you online, welcome. We are from LNHR, just an HR consultancy service. My name is Maureen Brown McKenna, and I'm a manager at LNHR. And I'll kind of introduce a little bit about our group and who's with us. We have Diane in the back, who is one of our amazing directors. We also have Maddie, who's going to be doing our presentation today. She's our HR generalist. And on our team, we also have Cassandra, who is another manager, Bianca, who is kind of our expert at recruiting and also has a section of experience in coaching. And then also Laura, who's not with us today, but she is our owner and our kind of live-in mascot. Like, she's just an incredible person. So we're here talking today about a really, really important subject, which is how to identify and manage situations where harassment comes up in the workplace. We have a bunch of examples and specifics, and also hopefully tips and tricks to help manage those things. And if you have any questions, please let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Maddie, who's going to lead us through the presentation today.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Great. Well, welcome you guys. I'm so happy to be here with you today. We're going to go ahead and just start talking about, like we're saying, identifying and preventing workplace harassment. So as leaders, you play a really pivotal role in creating a welcome, inclusive environment where employees can grow and also reach their full potential in the workplace. We're going to talk about a couple of objectives here today. So just a few we're going to hit. So defining harassment. So what does it even mean? Know the different types of harassment. So under that little umbrella, we're going to have understand what to do when harassment occurs, supervisor responsibilities, and finally protecting yourselves. So we'll start with the heavy part. So this is the legal definition. How do you define harassment? Harassment is unwelcome conduct based on race, color, religion, gender, national origin, age, disability, or genetic information. And that's a very heavy term to hear. There's a lot that goes into that, but what kind of falls under that as well? So harassment becomes unlawful when and during the offensive conduct becomes condition of continued employment. The conduct is severe enough to create a work environment where a reasonable person considers that hostile or abusive. Harassment is a form of employment discrimination that violates Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1967, the Age Discrimination Act of 1967, which is the ADEA, and or the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, formerly also known as ADA. So then why do we need to talk about harassment in the first place? So first up, no one wants to work in an environment where they don't feel welcome, they feel uncomfortable, and they being able to have a nice, safe space to work in every day. The prevention and elimination of harassment is everybody's responsibility. It's not just for leaders, it's for everyone involved. And then finally, we want to be able to keep the company out of the news and out of the courtroom. And as we all know, we have social media. So things can travel very fast on social media. So being able to make sure that we have the best workplace possible will keep us out of all of the above. So into the types of harassment that we currently have. So we're going to hit 5. So we've got sexual harassment, quid pro quo, hostile work environment, third-party harassment, and then bullying in the workplace. So we'll start with sexual harassment. Again, this is a legal term, so obviously there's a lot of, it's pretty bulky and there's a lot that goes into it. Sexual harassment is unwelcome, unwanted, or offensive sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and or verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature when submission to the conduct becomes either explicitly or implicitly a part of condition of employment. The conduct is unwelcome, unwanted, or offensive and has the purpose of or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's work performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. So then, what does that look like when you're at work? So, a couple of things that can look, couple examples of that is telling sexually implicit jokes at work. You can have people sending pictures of nude people at work. You could have some watching pornography at work, which is very frowned upon at work. Repeatedly asking the victim to go on a date or hang out with you, that is sexual harassment. And unwanted comments about physical features, which goes beyond just a nice gesture or a nice comment. Then we're going to jump into quid pro quo. So this for that. So someone in power asking for a favor from a subordinate employee in turn of giving them something that they want or that they've been looking for. An example is you have a supervisor who asks a subordinate employee to go away with him for the weekend. And in turn, if they go, they can either get a little extra PTO or you get that promotion that you've been really eyeing. So that makes it feel that the employee has to go. If I will ever want that, I have to do this. So it's a favor for the boss to have them go in turn of their reward. So being able to make sure we recognize those things also. So either, a manager could either on the same end transfer, like threaten to transfer, demote, terminate or other disciplinary actions against an employee if they don't do the favor that they request. Next, we're going to have a hostile work environment. I'm sure this is a term we've all heard before. So hostile work environment is created by a colleague whose actions, communication, or behavior make your job feel impossible. They make it really difficult to come to work every day just by this one person's actions. And it alters the terms or conditions of a reasonable workplace and making it an uncomfortable work environment for everybody. And so additionally, the behavior, actions, or communication must be discriminatory in nature for it to become a hostile work environment. So quick little example is not having this individual or coworker not letting a certain race of people come sit with them in the break room during lunch. Or say you have, you're on a project and an individual decides not to bid or take any products from a specific race of person or because of their sex or their gender. So all things to be noticeable of when it comes to hostile work environment can be something as small as like, oh, I don't want to take Mara's project because she has red hair and I don't like people with red hair. Something as little as that can make such an uncomfortable environment for everybody every day. Next, we're going to have third-party harassment. So third-party harassment is behavior not found offensive by some employees, but can make other employees uncomfortable just by having to be interacting with them in the same room or having to hear a discussion. So our example would be a group of employees talking about each other's sex lives at work, and they're in the presence of another person who feels really uncomfortable, does not feel good talking about that kind of stuff at home, at work. They want to keep their private lives private. So just by hearing that little bit or walking in, they're like, oh my gosh, like that just made me feel really uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about that at work or hear other people talk about that at work. Or another example we have is you're working on a job site and you're walking in and you hear a security guard catcalling a bunch of women walking by the job site. And you're walking and you just hear as you're walking by, you're like, man, that makes me feel uncomfortable that somebody is doing that right now. Then we're going to go on to bullying in the workplace. So bullying is when people deliberately use words or actions repeatedly against an individual or group to cause intentional physical, social, or psychological harm. And they usually want that person to feel like less powerful or helpless even. Bullying is 3 times more prevalent in the workplace than sexual harassment. So keep that in mind. And then we also have potential concerns that come with bullying in the workplace. You could have discrimination and harassment claims. You could have workplace violence. There can be drain in morale. You could have increased turnover, low productivity, and impact on your bottom line. So, and when people claim harassment, they often are speaking of bullying, which does not have the same discriminatory against a protected class. So then going into that, you're thinking, so what is the difference between bullying and harassment? They kind of, come really close together and you can really have a really fine line between the two. So the difference is going to be a couple of different things I've got here. So you have the intent, the motivation, and the legal portion. So intent of bullying is intentional harmful behavior, whereas harassment involves behavior that is discriminatory based on protected characteristics. So like we said, race, color, religion, age, disability, anything like that. Motivation. So then bullying may be driven by a desire for power, control, or personal satisfaction, whereas harassment is motivated by prejudice and bias against a person's protected characteristic. Finally, we have the legal portion. Harassment is a legal term. Bullying does not necessarily have a legal term. And bullying is not illegal, whereas harassment is. So harassment is more likely to have legal consequences due to its discriminatory characteristics. Like I said, race, color, religion, and bullying might not always have that same legal framework. So you can always kind of cross the two, and sometimes you might run into a harassment claim, which ends up being bullying in the workplace instead. Next, we're going to have what should an employee do when there is a harassment concern? If an employee believes they have been subjected to discrimination, workplace harassment, or sexual harassment, they should report that behavior immediately to an immediate supervisor, another member of management, or human resources. That complaint may be verbally or in writing. We want to make sure that that employee feels they can get that in as soon as possible. We don't and not have to worry about the middle part. They want to be done, get it over with. What is the impact of workplace harassment? These are just a couple little quotes that we have here from our findings. So 25% of workers have experienced workplace discrimination in their careers. That comes from CNBC. Employees experiencing discrimination are 32 less likely to reach their full potentials in their work, and that comes from Capper Center. And then we have workplace harassment and discrimination can result in an estimate of $64 billion in loss annually due to turnover. Finally, we're going to have improving workplace culture to promote inclusivity and prevent harassment can increase job satisfaction by 20%. So there are a lot of big negatives that also come and follow with harassment and bullying in the workplace. But we also have a positive if being able to promote inclusivity and diversity in the workplace that can make people feel, happier at work and be more involved in all those great things. So why is it important for employees to report discrimination? So discrimination, workplace harassment, and sexual harassment can cause employees to be hurt emotionally. You can see productivity go down, absenteeism will go up. The work of the agency could be jeopardized, and then employees can become fearful of others, and also your workplace morale overall can become reduced. And you don't want, you don't want people to feel uncomfortable having to report. You want them to feel that they can do it immediately. And then, why, on the other hand of this, why do people hesitate to report harassment allegations at all? They have fears of losing their job. There's fear of retaliation, fear of getting someone else in trouble, like, a good friend or a colleague that they have. There's fear of disrupting the workplace. There's fear of being embarrassed, and also be fear of being believed. We want everyone to know that they can come to us no matter what the situation is, no matter how small or how big it may be. So then, as leaders, what should you do when it comes to work? So set an example of respectful workplace behavior. Always be setting the bar every single day. Have clear expectations that discrimination, workplace harassment, and sexual harassment are not tolerated. And then have a clear mechanism for reporting, including the ability to report the member of management that you report to another manager. You also want to be able to take immediate steps to stop inappropriate behavior or conduct as soon as you see it. You also should be able to guard against retaliation, handle the investigations discreetly and as quickly as possible. You also want to be sensitive to the feelings of everyone involved. It's not easy for the person putting in the complaint, the one being accused, or anyone else who has to be involved in the investigation overall. So then for leaders, when do you call HR? So managers should report to HR when they receive a complaint of discrimination or harassment, they observe potentially discriminatory behavior, and they're unsure how to handle a situation, and that is related to discrimination or harassment. You might be walking down the hall at work and you hear something and you're like, that doesn't sit well with me, but what do I do? How do I handle that? Always call HR. We're always here to help and make sure that you make the right decision and that we're here to protect you and as well as your employees as well. So then a couple other little guidelines for everybody. So know your company's sexual harassment policy and keep your employees informed of this policy. Communicate with your team how to file complaints overall, and keep lines of communication open. Listen seriously to all harassment allegations. So always, you could even do it as small as doing your weekly manager meetings or team meetings. Just like, hey, real quick, just want to touch on our harassment policies and making sure everyone feels comfortable with them. If anyone has questions, please reach out to us and making sure they know how to file a report if they ever need to. Next, you'll talk about acting immediately if you suspect harassment or report concerns or complaints to the appropriate department, mostly HR. So you always want to come to us. Accurately document suspected incidents. You also want to make sure you're encouraging your employees to say no to harassing behavior. You don't want them to feel like they have to just take it on no matter what for their jobs. They want to feel safe. Finally, you want to keep everything confidential. Your employees come to you as like a safe spot. They want to feel like they can trust you and that you will protect them no matter what. So making sure you keep anything they tell you in regards to a harassment allegation is super serious, and keep it to yourselves or anyone who only has to be involved. Finally, we'll talk about protecting yourself. So keep your hands to yourself. You know, it's never a problem if you want to give a fist bump, a high five, pat on the back, but we'll keep it pretty cordial, keep it simple. Next, we're going to keep on the job conversation respectful. You can talk about, you know, very surface level situations like, how was your weekend? Did you have a good time? How are your kids? But keep it very minimal to that point. Next, you want to keep compliments casual. So, you know, you can tell someone like, hey, good job on your project or something small, but, you know, let's not get too in the nitty gritty of complimenting someone's dress or how they look at work that day. Avoid jokes, phrases, or gestures with sexual meaning. Next, we're going to respect a person's personal space. I know we all have a personal bubble in here, and not all of us want people in our personal bubble. So you might like standing real close to somebody, but someone else is like, give me like 4 feet. So always keep that in the back of your mind, how close we are interacting with our employees. And finally, model the behavior that you expect from your employees. Like I was saying earlier, set the standard, make sure that you walk into work every day, giving the best example of how it should be for everybody. So then another part of this that we were talking about is, how do you foster an inclusive workplace, right? So that's really important, but there's parts that go into that. It doesn't just happen overnight, right? So having an inclusive culture goes beyond hiring a diverse workforce. It's about creating an environment where people feel welcome, they feel safe, and they feel valued and heard, where their contributions matter to the office. So a couple things you can do: attend an unconscious bias training. You could go by yourself, you could send it to everyone, like, hey, if you'd like to come, we'd love for you to be there. You can encourage your team to become more aware of their own biases at work. You can promote empathy and understanding within the team. You can work with HR to make sure you have diverse hiring practices and job ads as well. Encourage open discussion and having diverse viewpoints at work. And recognize each team member's unique contribution to your team, and finally, promote respect. Yes.
So some of these things, such as attending unconscious bias training, isn't something most employees would ever think to do. They're outside of the normal scope of things.
Yeah.
Do you really see that companies get their employees to attend those type of things, and do they have to incentivize them, or?
No, I think it kind of depends. I would say if you are able to incentivize, awesome. But if you can be like, hey, like, if you as the leader are able to like come in with that confidence, like, this is really great for us. This is super amazing opportunity for us to all just work together and be able to provide a better workplace just every day. Even if you already feel like you have the best workplace on earth, it's never a problem or never anything that you should do regardless. So I think it comes more from like having the best opportunity to continue to create a good work environment. That should be the incentive. But also, if you want to incentivize people, say, oh, buy you lunch. You could also do that too.
So one more question.
Yeah.
We hear and see a lot about harassment in the news.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the national stage, you know, has been for some time.
Yeah.
In your experience with LNHR, what do you really see as local harassment issues? What are you seeing like here in the metro area, and how prevalent really is harassment situations in workplaces?
You know, that is a great question. And I think I'm gonna actually pass that to one of my team members to answer some of those questions, to be able to give some really awesome examples, because they have seen so many things and they could probably answer a little bit better than I could.
Do you want to come up?
Sure.
I can
Why not?
use the microphone.
You could yell or do that.
I'll try not to yell. So that's a really great question. We have a lot of experience with different businesses, and obviously different business models. The size of your company also can have that effect, but teeny tiny companies can still deal with harassment. It really only takes one individual who's making other people feel uncomfortable to get into the workplace bullying, and depending on how they're bullying, who they're bullying, why, it can cross over into that harassment area. I can say that in the last month, with some of our employees, we've handled, I think, 3 sexual harassment claims, unfortunately.
Is that normal? Is that or is that out of the normal?
It isn't out of the normal, unfortunately. I mean, the situations are usually out of the normal because people are very creative with how they decide to harass people. But yeah, it's not out of the normal. And in my career in Phoenix, I would say that it is constantly happening. It's just not always being reported. And a lot of people leave instead of reporting because they feel like the circumstances it's easier for them to just leave and get out of that circumstance versus fight for what they think is right and then face any consequences that come to them. Because even though we do protect our employees from retaliation for reporting, you know, there still are people like, oh, you got my best friend fired because blah, blah,
There's a lot of social
People who take
repercussions.
Yeah. So that's kind of one of the big things as a manager, as a supervisor, as an owner that you want to be thinking about is how can I make sure my employee feels safe reporting this? Because I don't want this happening in my organization. What steps can I take to foster that inclusive relationship and support differences in ideas so that people do feel comfortable coming forward if something is happening? A lot of times sexual harassment specifically can be hard to prove because it turns into the he said, she said, or he said, or she said, she said, however it ends up, right? And unless there's, you know, video evidence or it's done in writing, it can be hard to prove sometimes, which can lead to uncomfortable situations, and we can help manage those. But if you really work to try to foster that environment where everybody's appreciative of everybody, as a group, they kind of stop some of those behaviors from happening when they see it. Oh, you know, hey man, you always pat Betty on the butt as you walk by, and that's not okay. And those trends are starting to change. I think you do see people have a better understanding of what's acceptable at work, but it doesn't mean that it stops the behaviors that we've seen, and behaviors change. And now with like social media or text, or, you know, people find other ways to communicate with people outside of just like physically approaching them and doing something that we would have considered sexual harassment in the 60s, right? And also just the definition of harassment grows as the definitions of protected classes grow, and how you know, certain things that may have been acceptable even 10 years ago as a culture we're moving away from to make it again more inclusive and inviting to everybody. So just keeping those in mind. But yeah, unfortunately it does happen a lot. And I think things like the bullying and stuff that happens a ton and isn't reported, or is reported maybe to like a manager who doesn't really know how to handle it, and it's just like, you know what, just, you know, work it out amongst yourselves. And that sometimes works, but more often than not can start to kind of breed mistrust amongst the group.
Sorry, lots of questions.
Yes.
So common news article or news item see lately is people getting in trouble over misgendering. It's a big national topic. That's not, I mean, from what I understand, there's not a lot of law based around that yet.
Yeah.
What, I mean, do you see things in that field, and is there any advice you give to employers?
It can be, obviously it comes up more often, you know, in the news and things like that, especially in this day and age too. I would say, like we were saying earlier, like setting that example and always coming to work and like recognizing just like I said, sex, gender, sexual orientation, things like that. You want to be really mindful of those things in today's times, being able to talk to your employees and just, you know, saying, hey, how are you doing? But not, you know, I have it like surface, but yeah.
I have dealt with a situation like this, and it really boiled down to intent. If it was a genuine mistake, a slip of the tongue kind of thing, and there's that apology afterward, usually that's all that individual is looking for, is that acceptance. And I mean, they've lived their life, they understand that people are going to make mistakes. It's when the misgendering is done on purpose and repetitive that it does fall into that harassment category.
So like, here's an example that I'm thinking of that's very similar to that. You have an employee that comes to their manager and says, I'm now this pronoun and this is how I want to be referred to, right? But maybe there's a coworker that works around them that says, well, you can call yourself whatever you want. I don't recognize you as that. And they aren't malicious in misgendering, but they're definitely not willing to go along with what that person's request is because it makes them uncomfortable. Where's the real harassment there? And is there any law based in that, or?
Depending on how those individuals handle that, it might not end up harassment, but it definitely could end up impacting the morale of the team for sure. I would say in those situations, you know, sitting down with both individuals, really finding out, you know, where their feelings are stemming from, how can we solve this before it becomes an issue is gonna really help. It also, depending on the people involved, could require maybe some outside assistance with, you know, somebody who has more training in psychology or something like that to come in and help in that circumstance, or somebody who has more expertise in HR versus just a manager having to handle it like completely off the bat. But I definitely think going forward, we're going to see more and more of this. And if you're thinking of yourself as an inclusive workplace, then you are going to try to accept any of those changes to remain a positive, happy place. You are going to have a little bit of backlash when it comes to people that just don't agree with lifestyle changes. So it's more about how do we manage those at work. Outside of work, you can have your opinions on politics and religion and all kinds of things. But at work, when we're focused and we're doing our job, what actually, you know, matters and how can we support that teamwork, you know? So I think trying to reframe that as, I understand that maybe you don't agree with this person's decision. However, in order to maintain team morale, what can we do to make sure that we are, you know, continuing to move forward instead of having these things stop us in our tracks and focus on outside of work problems later. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think something that I've been seeing more that is really supportive about like sexual orientation and whatnot is companies, and also me during my undergrad, we started including our pronouns in our email signatures. And that made it easy for employers to protect themselves, because they're like, you have it listed, like this is what you prefer to be called, and then also for the employee or the student to feel safe, like I've already let you know this is what I want to be referred to as, and it's just kind of like a small but easy step into inclusivity. So
Absolutely. And I think also you brought up a great point, Pauline, about like, if you think about it from protecting the business standpoint, you would never want that employee to be able to bring a discriminatory lawsuit against the business because they didn't do anything to protect them. You know, it's one person or one thing to have to deal with a person in the business and handling harassment claim or taking them down the path of corrective action if that needed to be, but in the case that that person brought a lawsuit, you could say like, hey, here's X, Y, and Z that we did to try to stop this situation from happening in order to protect the company. Whereas if it's the company's bias itself that's showing, or the owner of the company or something like that, I can get the company into trouble. So it's really trying to, again, understand like, how can I make sure that my personal biases are not coming into the decision-making or how I'm treating my employees that can get me into trouble with protected classes. And even though technically pronouns aren't a protected thing, it does fall into sexuality and gender, which are. So it is still a gray area. Things are still changing and evolving, but I think we want to get ahead of it as a business and be inclusive right off the bat so that you aren't in the news, you know, with somebody who felt like they were harassed and put in a really bad situation. Because as soon as your name pops up with those headlines, even 10 years down the road, if I'm looking up, oh, I want to work for this company, and that's something that pops up, that's just not great branding, right? So, but ultimately, it's about the employee experience. So how can we make sure that we have the best time? Are there any other questions about
Any other
that?
questions?
I'm gonna let Maddie keep going.
All right. One more slide. So again, so as managers, we are key players in creating that inclusive, respectful, safe workplace for everybody by promoting respect and implementing clear policies and encouraging open communication amongst everyone. We are able to help combat harassment and discrimination every day. And then, do we have any other questions? Yes.
I would like to know, how would we conduct if an employee came to us and wants to, how do I word this, wants to be anonymous. So they're like, there's an employee this is a manager, an employee came to a manager, and was like, so-and-so happened, but I want to be anonymous.
Mhm.
I don't want anybody to know it was me that
Yeah.
complained. What options do we have to conduct? Like, to go further to find out further information on this
Of course.
allegation?
So obviously we were talking about keeping that confidentiality between you and that employee is super important, and they're asking to be anonymous. Being able to kind of hold that as true as you can without them being involved, unless it's serious enough where they need to be involved and names need to be said. Like if it was, like you're saying, like a really serious sexual harassment situation, that person needs to be involved because we need to be able to combat that situation and be able to make sure that everyone involved in that situation is involved. So all parties need to be on the same page, you know, if they're being investigated, they all have to be a part of this investigation. So we have to make sure that we have to keep it like anonymous until it's unsafe for the other employee. So like harmful behavior, you know, things like that at work, that's when we need to remove that anonymous portion of it. But at the same token, there's other examples. If Diane or Lauren want to chime in, you look interested, Miss Diane.
One thing that you can do is when someone comes to you with a concern, you can tell them that you'll keep this as confidential as possible. But in order to conduct the investigation and get to the real kind of root cause, you know, there may need to be some people involved or questions asked that is going to let that confidentiality kind of go by the wayside, but it's only in the process of conducting the investigation. And you can try as hard as you can, but sometimes that you just have to do that in order to get all of the information that you're going to need.
And I would never it's really common that they come to you because it's usually an uncomfortable situation. So I don't promise anonymity, and I tell them right away, I can't promise that because I have a duty to look into what you've just reported to me. However, I can promise you that if you are facing any kind of issues, repercussions from reporting, retaliation for reporting, that I will handle those. So you come to me as soon as somebody comes up to you, makes you feel uncomfortable about that reporting, or the person that you have accused is making you feel uncomfortable. Like, that's how we can protect that person, but we can't keep them anonymous in most situations. Every once in a while that one will pop up where it's like, oh yeah, we can handle that. But usually when you very first talk to the person that is being accused, they know what they've done, so they know who's involved. We also, during that process, to every single person down the line that you talk to, you reiterate that anti-retaliation policy. Make sure that, I'm talking to a supervisor. Have you seen anything happen between these two employees? Okay, well, now that you know that this is potentially happening, remember, we have an anti-retaliation policy. So if your employee comes to you or you see anything, let us know. And just kind of broadcasting that as you are going through. And if other employees who aren't involved at all start coming and talking, or you hear them gossiping about what's going on, just shut that down. Say like, hey, we're not talking about this at work. This is not appropriate. If you have something to say, let me know. I'm happy to have that conversation with you, but this is not the time or place to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So with HR, if this is just a question I've always had.
Yeah.
Because of the job I used to work at, there was a lot of reporting to HR, the manager, that when you were explaining these things like the harassment, it wasn't to the extreme, but there was like, of course, some harassment there. And the thing is we were a bunch of us were reporting to HR of things, the mistakes he was doing / a lot of other stuff I'm not going to go into detail with, but I just want to know the process when you report to HR, what happens after you report to HR, because I've always wondered that.
Definitely.
I want to know that too.
Okay, yeah, so, say you came to me with, I would say either harassment or complaint, anything under the sun that you wanted to bring to us. We're here to we take it and we observe what you give us, and then we do our own personal investigation. We keep it amongst HR to be able to determine, factual things. So we reach out to the person that has a complaint or harassment claim to them and be able to have a conversation with them as well, or any other supervisors, before we make an assumption or be able to move forward with anything. And then if it's a matter that needs to be escalated to another level to be able to make a formal decision, then we move into the next step of being able to have a formal investigation with the complainant and the accused. If it's performance related and it comes to us, then we need to talk with whoever is their supervisor and be able to just have a conversation of what steps we take to be able to either to help that employee be able to have a better outcome and help their performance or help their workplace culture and their impact in the workplace as well. So it has a very fine line of deciding where it kind of falls once you have a complaint.
It can also depend on if there's evidence. If somebody comes and was like, hey, I'm being sexually harassed, and here are the text messages, here's a video, here's blah, 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 then maybe we don't need to go interview 10 people about being a possible witness, because actually here we have hard evidence that we can back up.
Yeah.
If it is one of those he said, she said, maybe, and there were 3 people that potentially could have heard, maybe we do need to go have those interviews. So it can depend on the situation, but ultimately we need to bring it to the point where we can make a decision on if, yes, we agree this is harassment, we can prove it, this is how we're gonna take, this is the consequence that we feel comfortable offering in this situation, or unfortunately, we have no evidence of this, but we're still gonna have those discussions with everybody so they understand what the expectations are moving forward so that they don't happen again. And if we couldn't prove it the first time and then, hey, there's rumblings about the same person and the same kind of thing in 6 months, then now we have a pattern of behavior we can talk about, even if we didn't have the evidence the first time around. But we do have processes that we follow, and we make sure that we are doing everything to maintain, confidentiality during our investigations, and that whatever decision we're coming up with in the end, we can back up with our investigation.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
You also might not always know what we're doing, especially if you're the person that's made the complaint. I often, they'll be like, hey, I haven't seen any update. I'm still seeing this person at work. What's happening? A lot of times I kind of have to say, like, I totally understand. Again, let me know if you're facing any kind of issue with retaliation, but we are still doing the investigation. You may never know what happens, what the outcome is, especially if it ends up being like a written warning. We're not going to broadcast that around. So I just say, like, please know that we're handling this in, the best way that the company can. Because again, just like I'm not sharing your concerns with everybody, I'm not going to share that employee's personal file with you. But it's been handled.
Well, how do you maintain a psychologically safe environment for your employees to continue reporting to you in HR if you're not giving updates on a previous harassment claim? So I know it's been handled.
Yeah, so you absolutely can give updates, you just can't always give details on
Okay,
what the outcome was. So yeah, 100%, like, you can let them know if it's still ongoing, or we have finalized this now and action has been taken, but you might not say what that action is. And they might not be happy with what the action is, because maybe they don't want that person working here anymore, but
They're also gonna
unfortunately,
be personally biased.
yeah, we don't have the evidence to terminate. If it is a place where they feel really unsafe or something really drastic has happened, maybe we're suspending somebody during the investigation to create a safe space. I mean, it really depends on the situation. But 100% maintain that communication, especially with the person that's created the claim. But just share with them, like, you might not be able to share like the personal details of what the outcome is, just because it is their employment file. But it has been handled, it's been closed. Please let me know if anything else comes up.
Okay.
So you're giving them the confidence it's being handled, or it has been handled. you might not be able to be like, hey, you wanna read the file? Right, so.
Okay. And then to piggyback off of that, what do you recommend employees do if they report something to a manager, supervisor, or HR, and they feel that it's not being taken care of? Like, is there anybody else you can go above your company? Is there like an outside HR resource, information?
I mean, in Arizona, there isn't a big one. I mean, if it's a really, really terrible case, there are, I mean, you could get a lawyer or you could contact, the EEOC, but, in the case where you just don't feel like I told my manager and I don't think that they're doing anything, that's when you would go to their manager, HR, blah, blah. If you really feel like the company is not doing anything, maybe schedule an appointment to try to figure out what's being done or why it hasn't been done. If it's really, really big, yeah, obviously there are like legal resources, but in most cases, there is going to be some kind of outcome because companies can't risk just not doing anything, so.
Mhm.
Like our company too, we have an email address that any employee can email to if they feel like, because we've had in the past where they report to their manager and their manager doesn't ever pass it along when they should have. So it kind of gets stopped in that, transition. So, but we have an anonymous email that they can write into and it goes directly to our CEO and myself. So that way they feel like at least they know somebody's listening to them if they feel like it kind of got stopped in the process.
Absolutely.
A lot of companies will have like a compliance line
Mhm.
Mhm.
that you can either call and leave a message or you can email.
Yeah.
So those are really important and those are the best ways, I think, to get a lot of these behaviors reported because people feel safer reporting them. Now, the flip side of that is it takes more investigation because you're never for sure if it's just somebody wanting to get, like me wanting to get Maren in trouble or Maddie. So you really have to, whoever is answering those emails or those phone calls, getting those messages, they have to really have a good sense of, the environment and things like that. But yeah, a lot of companies have recently, well, not recently, but in the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years, have really started setting up those compliance lines or emails.
Yeah.
And just making sure that they go to the proper people, and not, anybody who's gonna share you won't believe what we got, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
So-
also as a manager, or supervisor, I like to say, like, you never wanna be the only one that knows something.
Mhm.
So if something's happening in your group of employees that you're managing, even if you think like, oh, I've done this before, I could probably handle it, at least let your supervisor know what's happening,
Mhm.
because if it does come down to it that it didn't get solved and it blew up into something much bigger and it comes down to like, oh, and I knew about it and I didn't say anything, then that could get you in trouble. So it's another way to protect yourself. Like, if you hear about something, let someone else know. Don't be the only one that has that information. Make sure you're sharing it with somebody that is an acceptable person to share that.
To kind of piggyback on what she was saying, what if we did an investigation and we found that there was no sexual conduct or that there was no evidence, like, I'm sorry, like we didn't find any. How do you tell that employee that was complaining about this that, sorry, there's no evidence, we don't find any cause, there is no action taken, so you can prevent that employee feeling like, was it all in my head? Like, how do you go about all that?
It's a really hard conversation to have, and I've had them and I hate having those kind of conversations, but ultimately, I can't fire somebody for just because someone else said something, right? Because that could happen in any circumstance. I don't think that there's ever a no action taken though. So, if we can't find evidence to actually take corrective action, we can still have those discussions about what's acceptable behavior going forward. And then as a supervisor or manager, you can keep a closer eye on the situation.
For their awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's always things you can do, like not saying you can't, there's not always something you can do, but you can always take those preventive measures going forward. Say you had something and there was no cause or anything at the end, where you weren't able to give like a, the person who the accuser was like, or the person who put in the complaint is like, well, what happens now? Like, if they're still working here, I'm still working here. What are we supposed to do now? If you're in a situation, you can like be able to, if they don't feel comfortable working next to that person, providing them options within the workplace, like moving, if you want to move where you work, if you have different shifts, making sure they're not on the same shifts, if that's something that needs to be a conversation. I, personally have seen that happen, so it can happen, it's something that if it's to just protect them and make sure that there's no ongoing issues and be able to keep them, I guess, separate if you can, that's always something you can think about too. And that can make the person who's complaining feel a little bit more comfortable, like, okay, like, even if this happened, at least I know that I don't have to interact with this person every day if I don't have to. But also it just comes down to the situation and what you guys think is best for your business too. Yes.
So we have a question from someone online.
Okay.
Said, we had a situation where two employees started to engage in an affair. It didn't necessarily offend the work environment, but made others uncomfortable since they were both married at the time. So it was more of a moral issue. Since these were two consenting adults, other than maintaining a workplace relationship policy, how would you advise handling this situation?
That is a great question. What would you, I'm gonna ask Lauren for some recommendations
Yeah.
on this one.
So I've had this situation.
Could you use the microphone?
Yeah,
for
I'll come
that?
over here. So I've had this exact situation before and had to deal with it. And I can tell you that we did have a relationship in the workplace policy that we went over with both parties and had them sign. Saying basically that while at work, they're not in a relationship. Not that they have to hide their relationship, but not making out in the hallways or walking holding hands. They're coworkers while they're at work, just like we would expect any couple to be. And then outside work, what they do is on their own. So ultimately, it shouldn't have an impact on what's going on at work. If it does start to impact work, that's when we start to have further discussions. It has come to the point before where we've had to transfer somebody or, whatever. But ultimately, and it also can depend on the business, but we do try to just make sure that we're being professional while at work. If they aren't getting that message and they continue to make people feel uncomfortable with their relationship, then we can take further action. I did have an issue one time where it did lead to somebody being terminated because unfortunately their outside work came inside, the other parties that were involved in this affair started coming to work and it became an issue and we couldn't have that, especially for the safety of our other employees.
So if I'm hearing you, the short answer there is having a strong workplace relationship policy is the important first step.
Yes.
And if that's not sufficient, then that just becomes a manager to subordinate discussion where you tell them you're impacting our culture here. How can we work on this? And just work with them.
Absolutely.
And if they're not willing to and continue to make a scene, then you consider taking other action.
Perfectly said, yes. Yeah, I definitely think, it is an uncomfortable situation, even if they're not having an affair, even if it's just two employees dating and it's totally fine for them to normally be dating, but it's uncomfortable because maybe you're the third party in the group or whatever. It's still they're dating or they're being involved with each other shouldn't be impacting the work. So it's really about how can we make sure that that's not happening. And if it is happening, what can we do to change that? What things can we put in place? And definitely if they're in a relationship, they have to understand that it will impact their ability to be promoted because they could never be managing the person that they're in a relationship with. So that it's another important thing that sometimes people don't think about. And if it's not really that big of a relationship, it's just a fling, that sometimes does cause people to think more carefully about if this is going to continue at work. Okay, how many other questions?
How often should employers be reviewing their policies with employees?
The harassment policy in general?
Yeah.
As often as you need to.
At least annually.
Yeah,
Like,
annually and with new
Mhm.
employees that are coming.
like we're talking about like kind of like that huddle situation, if you have like weekly meetings and if you have new people on the team, just be like, hey, just want to touch base, really reiterate again. Our sexual harassment policy and our conflict, our confidentiality and how to put in complaints, so that way. New people have an understanding. It also reminds the people who are currently employed that have been there for some time. Like, oh yeah, like this is a good thing to know, and that way they're able to be aware and be able to be conscious about it at all times.
Also, as a manager or supervisor, if you start to see things happening, for instance, like all of a sudden you start to hear more like locker room or shop talk kind of happening in one area, address it. You don't have to wait for a problem to actually occur. And maybe in that kind of situation, maybe you have it in your quarterly huddle or monthly huddle, or send out a email reminder about how to report anything that's going on that makes you feel uncomfortable.
So follow-up question to the original one. What if one of them is a subordinate, but again, consensual? How does that change things?
Not okay. Absolutely not okay. They basically at that point should be offered either to no longer be in a relationship, or one of them is no longer working there. If you have the ability, like you have different sites where they can never really be in, not in contact, like obviously they can talk to each other, but it should not affect the reporting line at all. They should not in any way be in a position where it can look like they got a raise because they're in a relationship with that person. They got promoted because they're in a relationship with this person. They didn't get in trouble because they're in a relationship with this person, because that breeds harassment claims like nobody's business. So there are a couple situations where it happens, like maybe a husband and wife own a company together and the husband is the, owner, manager, president, and the wife acts as an accountant or something. There are some circumstances where it's okay, but 99% of the time we don't want it happening. And that would be a situation where you would say, like, this cannot happen. Let's talk about what it looks like going forward. You're not saying that they can't be together, but they cannot be together and reporting to each other.
So do
Maybe
those,
you're demoting somebody, so their demotions almost never work. But it could be an option, like, hey, we made you a line supervisor here, but if you want to be in a relationship with this person, it matters to you, maybe you're back on the line with them or whatever. But direct reporting line, absolutely not. And honestly, just reporting anywhere in the company can lead to those potential claims of preferable treatment, or they're going against, our company values because that person slept with somebody, then they get all this. I mean, it's just not a good situation. And definitely one that you want to make HR aware of if that does come up.
so would those types of terms have to be spelled out in a workplace relationship policy specifically? Or is there some type of general understanding that this is?
So it doesn't have to be in a workplace relationship policy. And it is kind of a general understanding.
You put in handbook.
Thank
Oh,
you.
I was
I was gonna say, I was like, what's happening? Yeah, it should be a general understanding that all businesses should not have that in it. It can be just in the handbook, like inappropriate relationships. Nobody can report to somebody that they're in a personal relationship with. It could even be a close friendship, family, friends. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It is a outside of work relationship that we have to really be careful about.
What's your question?
I was just we get it a lot because we're in the restaurant industry. So
Yeah.
a lot of times it's they either have to transfer stores,
Mhm.
or one of them has to make the choice to leave. But as long as it's, a part of your handbook and stuff like that, it really, and you're consistent with it. I think consistency with the situations is the most important thing, but most people understand that it's gonna happen. And, a lot of them will just come to you and be like, hey, we're in a relationship, I need to transfer. So as long as you're consistent and have it clearly written for them, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And
Yeah. always,
1,000%.
always being aware of that too, I think also especially in the service industry, you kind of run in, like you said, you run into that a lot more often. So being able to, I think, have options for them, even if they did, like if you, again, same thing as like the zero tolerance, like bullying, zero tolerance, like drama policy. A lot of companies will have those because, you know, there's always that one person who's like, oh, did you hear about this person and this person and this person and this person? And you just want to be like, hey, you know, if this is something, if they came to you or if you had suspicions, just like, hey, if you are, that's fine, but these are the options that you have, and being able to just make it clear and simple for them to understand.
On top of that, like just really reinforcing we're professional at work also helps if that relationship doesn't last and they still are working together and now there are other feelings. So again, it's maintaining that professionalism, making sure that their outside issues are not affecting workplace.
Lots of questions here.
Okay.
So, if a business, like take, for example, there's a CEO of a sales organization, and he predominantly has hired his own sons to be the salesman.
Mhm.
There are other salesmen that are not his sons, but it's common knowledge that, I mean, others are getting fired, sons will never get fired, they're getting the preferential territories. How do you deal with an HR situation like that?
Yep, so nepotism is a big word right now. You've started to see that appear in the news a lot more recently. You know, if you own a company and you are able to provide the people that you love and care about with employment and you want to work with them, there's nothing wrong with that. It's really about making sure that you're treating everyone the same. So, okay, maybe not all the salespeople are going to come over to your house for Thanksgiving like your sons would, but if I'm giving people raises, I'm going to need to make sure that I'm giving raises at that level across the board. If I'm giving bonuses, if I have routes that people are taking and there's one really good one and then there's one really bad one, then maybe quarterly I'm switching it up. Maybe I'm making sure that people have the opportunity to have everything that my family members have if they're on the same level in the organization.
I would say if it comes to a territory base, if you're talking about like sales, like outside salespeople, I think it also can come into working with HR, whoever is in charge of distinguishing those territories, where that line falls, saying like, hey, if they can kind of like cross in here, making it fair. So you can't give all of the low productivity territory to one salesperson and hide another, like find a medium saying, okay, you're going to take, you know, for example, you're going to take North Mesa, but you guys will kind of coincide right here in the middle of Mesa. You guys will split that in half so that it makes it the territory even, so that they both have a chance to have higher productivity and getting that revenue that they want without feeling like, man, they only got that just because that's their son. You see that a lot, I think, in like construction industries and like rental industries. I've seen that a lot where they have issues with people getting territories that are unfavorable based off of their status.
So in this particular case, it's an international sale. So we're talking about countries.
Yeah.
And the highest productivity countries were specifically given to the CEO's sons, and HR was very beholden to that CEO, and he was a very hot-headed CEO. And so HR didn't want to get in the middle of that at all. And so the employees just, what do you do? Because HR doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, but everyone knows.
Yeah.
How, as an employee, I mean, is that just kind of a bad situation and you look for another job, or is there not?
It's a great situation to be in. I was just going to add, and I'll definitely answer that question, but I think if you are hiring family too, or close friends or whatever, qualifications matter. That person should be qualified for the role that you're putting them into, so it doesn't appear like, hey, my son just graduated high school and now he's going to be the vice president of this company, even though you have a master's degree, you know? That obviously looks like that. But if you can say like, oh yeah, my son has 15 years experience in this industry, of course they're going to be at this level, then there's less of an issue there. But as far as HR being beholden to like the whims of the CEO, that happens. As somebody in HR, I would probably try to explain to the CEO what that perspective looks like from outside of the family, because again, it's amazing I can offer the people that I love all of the amazing things in the world, right? I want to protect them and give them you know, the ability to have a great lifestyle if I can afford to do that. But how does that impact the rest of my company? What happens if the rest of my company leaves because, and I'm left with just my sons? Can I still run my company? And try to offer that perspective. And if it's a big enough company or it's a big enough problem, potentially consulting with an attorney or employment law specialist about how does this look? Is this gonna be an issue, even for getting and attracting clients and keeping clients? If they know that, oh, you know, I give all the good work to my son and, you know, whatever. So it is a really tricky situation. It's not illegal to have your children work for you or family members or whoever. We don't want to discriminate. Discrimination can be illegal. Well, discrimination is illegal, and some of those things can fall into discriminatory practices. If I could say, like, all of my sons, you know, have all these great companies, and the female sales associate does not have any of them. Okay, that would be hard for a company to defend. So it's trying to get an eye on what that looks like as an organization. It happens, but that's why we try to clean those situations up, or at least clean up like the perspective of what's happening.
Any other questions?
Is it? I want to say yes, it's okay, but I still want to confirm. Is it okay if if somebody comes to you, wants to report discrimination or harassment? You talk to them, let them talk to you, and at the end, you're like, what would you like for me? Or how would you like for us to proceed? Is it okay to ask the employee that's complaining how they would like for us to take care of this, or not take care of it, but to handle it?
So I actually think it's best practice to ask them what they want the outcome of an investigation to be. You might be able to tell them right away, hey, what you've just told me isn't a terminable offense. That person's not going to get fired for this, but we are going to look into it. I take your complaint seriously. They might also come to you and say, I just want this to change. And then, that's something that we can work on. But I think it's part of really listening to what the complaint is to understand how it's affecting them and what they want the outcome to look like, because you're not them. I can't get into that person's brain. I need them to tell me, how is this affecting you? I can assume how I would feel in the situation, but I'm not in that situation. So it's a really good tactic at the end of the conversation to be like, what would you like the outcome to be? And if it's an outcome that is like not in line with what the situation is, you can try to clear that up right then and there, instead of making them feel like something huge is going to happen and it doesn't.
Like if they're like, oh, I want Joe fired. Okay, well, we will have to take an investigation. We'll have to look further into this and investigate this, allegation. But I can't promise if Joe will be fired.
Exactly. That's exactly how I would answer that. And then again, I would reiterate, but we do have an anti-retaliation policy and get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, so everyone loves to talk. But a question I have is, if you know something, like I've always had this question when I've been coming to these classes, is if you know something, are there consequences with you, like yourself, because you're guilty by association?
So again, it depends on the situation, what you know, and what the aspects of the situation is. If somebody is in danger and you don't say something, then yeah, you can be held accountable for it. Again, like I said, when you're the manager, really, if you're anybody, you never want to be the person that knows when something like harassment is happening.
What do you mean by that?
So maybe Maddie is being harassed at work and she's told me this, but we're friends, so she's told me this in confidence.
But it shouldn't just stay between the two of us.
The two of us. I'm gonna say to Maddie, like, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I actually think that we should report this. Maybe I go with her to report it. Maybe I help her. Sometimes we do have coworkers reporting harassment situations on behalf of other people. And sometimes that helps when somebody is really scared to make a report,
Yeah.
to have that person that does know the situation and can help coax them into talking to HR about it. But as soon as you do see something that is illegal, that puts the company in danger, that puts the employee in danger, you need to say something to somebody. And if you're a manager and hearing that report from somebody, you need to take it up the chain and report it. You cannot deal with something, especially a safety issue, by yourself.
Also, if you think about like, I know that the term like whistleblower, so think about that, like you are always protected, like if you see something and you know it's wrong, say something. Like you're not gonna be discriminated or retaliated against for doing the right thing.
How many people do you say we should say something to?
I mean, if you're just making a report, you should only have to make the report to one person and it should go up the chain in a perfect world. But if you do have internal HR, I would recommend going to them to make sure that something is and that they're aware, because every once in a while it gets stopped somewhere and it doesn't make it all the way up. So if you have internal HR, I would definitely go there. Otherwise, I would just make sure that your manager is aware of it. And if you think your manager is competent and can handle those situations, that should be good. If your manager's involved, though, make sure that you're going above them.
And I think you want to get the message across to all of the employees that they are also responsible if they see, if they see any kind of behavior like that going on, that they're responsible to report it too. Even if it's not impacting them, it's still your responsibility, because sometimes people go, oh, well, didn't bother me. But you really need to make sure, and that's where the annual harassment training comes in, as well as in the handbook. So those are two things that you can do to kind of put that in place.
Did you have another question too?
No, I was gonna come.
Okay, sounds good. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much again, and for all your questions. It was super, super awesome. If you need anything else, just go ahead and you can always reach out to us at LNHR. We're always happy to help you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.